The central organizing concept of opportunity theories is, well, opportunity, and specifically opportunity to commit crime. After all, without opportunity, there can be no crime. Opportunities are rooted in the crime event itself. Rather than focus on why or how individuals are disposed to commit crime in a general sense, opportunity theories examine the motive and ability to carry out a specific criminal event at a specific place and time. Situational and environmental factors shape crime decisions. How difficult a crime is perceived to be influences the choice to commit a crime or not to commit a crime. This explains why criminals are not constantly engaging in criminal acts all the time. They are limited by these situational and environmental factors that structure opportunities for crime. This will be important for later. The starting point for opportunity theories of crime is rational choice. With the background established on classical theories of criminology last week, it should be fairly straightforward to see how this classical school centered on free will and choice informed the development of a rational choice theory. Recall Bentham's hedonistic or pleasure-pain calculus. All humans have a natural tendency towards self-interest. We choose behaviors that bring pleasure and avoid behaviors that bring pain. Therefore, crime is largely the result of opportunistic choices based in this self-interest to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Actions are chosen due to a rational calculation weighing the costs against the benefits. The decision to violate the law is a choice resulting from rational decision-making. If it is determined that a crime will require less work for greater payoff, the rational choice is to commit that crime. There is more to gain from committing the crime than not committing the crime. Therefore, laws and punishments for breaking those laws should provide a counterbalance to the benefits of crime. If the crime becomes more detrimental than beneficial to the individual, the rational choice will then be to choose not to engage in the criminal act. Rational choice theory focuses on similarities rather than the differences between criminal behavior and non-criminal behavior. All behavior is the result of a rational decision-making process. Rational choice focuses on mundane, everyday decisions and choices. We use the same cognitive reasoning when considering different types of actions. This is not always a lengthy process. It could be a split-second decision. Our minds automatically process these decisions. We do this all day, every day, in our routine actions and interactions. Even decisions made rapidly and without long-term planning are still based on a shorthand template we've built for everyday decision-making. So, according to rational choice, criminal behavior is not distinctly different from other types of behavior. There's no reason to think criminal decisions are made in a different way, that it's somehow an irrational process while other decision-making remains rational. The only difference is that criminal behavior gets typecast as abnormal, unpredictable, or evil. But most criminal behaviors remain rational. The key is that it's rational from the perspective of the person doing it. It may not be rational from our own perspective as an observer, but it is rational from the offender's perspective. We may think, why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. But to them, the decision is rational in the moment it is made. Decisions to commit crime can either be impulsive or premeditated, but still rational. If decisions to commit crime truly result from a rational decision-making process, then there are practical implications. That is, if the circumstances surrounding the immediate situation can be changed, the opportunity for crime can be reduced or eliminated. By recognizing these potential opportunities and the benefits derived from crime, possible interventions can be identified and implemented. The key then is focusing interventions on changing the perceptions of potential offenders, altering their cost-benefit judgments. Essentially, what can be done to make it harder to commit crime. This brings us to another opportunity theory to which you were already introduced when we discussed victimization, routine activities theory. There are three key elements of routine activities: a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of capable guardians. Only when these three elements converge at the same time and in the same place is crime and victimization possible. A motivated offender speaks for itself. There needs to be an offender who is motivated to carry out a crime. Routine activities does not explain what motivates an individual to become an offender, but rather how and why a criminal event occurs. It assumes motivated offenders exist and tries to explain why these motivated offenders choose to engage in specific criminal events. That said, a motivated offender is not enough by itself. A motivated offender can't commit a crime if there is no opportunity available to carry one out. The two remaining elements of routine activities form this opportunity for a motivated offender to act. There needs to be a suitable target. Targets can be persons or property. For persons, a motivated offender chooses a target that is vulnerable, unlikely to fight back, or has some type of symbolic or emotional value to the offender. An existing personal relationship, or hate crimes being two examples. For property, a target will be chosen that's portable, easy to move and hide, valuable, has some type of monetary worth, or fungible, can be exchanged for something else. A motivated offender can only carry out a crime on a suitable target if there are no capable guardians there to prevent it. The two most common ways of introducing guardianship are blocking access, physically preventing the offender from getting to the target, and surveillance, such as security cameras and alarm systems, which raise the risk of getting caught. Capable guardians increase the risk to the offender, reducing the attractiveness of the target, thus making it less likely a criminal event will take place. Routine activities theory directly informed the development of the problem analysis triangle, also known as the crime triangle. The problem analysis triangle adds an additional layer of possible controllers or discouragers of crime: guardians, handlers, and managers. The idea of guardians comes directly from routine activities. They are the people who can help protect a target. This could include people protecting themselves and their peers and loved ones, but also police and security. Handlers are those who have a relationship with a potential offender who could exert some level of control informally over them: parents, significant others, other family members, peers, teachers, and in the case of prior offenders, probation or parole officers. And managers are those who have some responsibility and control over places where crime could occur: homeowners, store and restaurant or bar employees, teachers, landlords, garage and flight attendants, many others. It takes a broad scope of all the potential persons whose presence or absence could be the determining factor in whether any particular criminal event takes place. The problem analysis triangle provides a central foundational support for crime analysis and problem-solving approaches to assessing and identifying opportunities inherent in various crime problems. The problem-solving approach, central to problem-oriented policing, encourages a holistic assessment of crime problems and collaborative efforts between communities, police, and other government and non-government organizations to identify and implement solutions to those problems. The problem-solving approach involves analyzing all the different aspects of a problem to obtain an in-depth understanding of what's going on, using all available evidence to identify patterns indicating a larger crime problem, and the goal is to develop a unique response specifically tailored toward addressing that problem. It also involves routine evaluation to find out whether and how the response is working. Numerous problem-oriented policing resources have been deployed, including how-to guides, problem and resource guides, and case studies. Listed here are just a few examples of these guides available through the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing, assessing a wide array of crime problems. Developing solutions to crime problems based on their unique opportunity structures is central to situational crime prevention. At its most basic level, situational crime prevention is anything that is done to change the situations and circumstances in which crime is likely to occur to make it either less likely to occur or prevent it from occurring altogether. The premise of situational crime prevention is that prevention is the most effective way to deal with crime problems. After all, the best way to deal with crime is to not have to deal with it at all, to stop it before it happens in the first place. Strategies for situational crime prevention involve changing the social and physical environment facilitating criminal opportunities. A crime is more likely to occur if it is easy to commit, has a low risk of detection, offers attractive rewards, social conditions or the environment foster the crime, and it is easy to justify or excuse. Therefore, addressing any of these factors should reduce and prevent crime from occurring by increasing the effort, increasing the risks, reducing the rewards, removing potential provocations, and removing excuses. These are the primary strategies for situational crime prevention, and within them, examples of various techniques for implementing each strategy. Situational crime prevention approaches have been widely used and often shown to be effective, but this depends on a number of factors. First, implementation is key. Many things can go wrong when implementing these strategies that undermine their effectiveness, even when they may have been sound in theory. Second, strategies are situation specific. The same strategies won't necessarily work in different areas. Residential areas, businesses, schools, parking garages, different places require different strategies tailored to that particular environment. Third, strategies will not be effective without the involvement, commitment, and support of both communities and the police. And finally, evaluation is also essential to see if it is working, and if so, how is it working, and what about it is working. This includes assessing possible diffusion of benefits, expansion of prevention to other types of crimes or other areas, and displacement of crime, where crime moves or disperses to another area or over a broader area. So, these are some of the ideas behind opportunity theories and the implications for offenders as rational actors who may be swayed against making criminal decisions through changes in the social and physical environment. But they are far from universally accepted, and there are numerous criticisms of rational choice in particular that are important to consider. One criticism is that assertions of rational decision making rely on circular logical reasoning, using the conclusion as part of the argument to justify that same conclusion. That is, rational choice assumes we are rational decision makers, so our decisions must then be rational. But at the same time, we cannot argue a decision is rational by using the decision itself as evidence of rationality. Rational choice has also been criticized for its lack of objectivity and inability to be tested. How do we truly determine if decisions are rational? How do we test this? The only way to do so is to examine brain functioning, which isn't exactly realistic. Therefore, assertions of rationality are made indirectly through subjective determinations by outside observers. Another critique is that rational choice does not by itself explain why, when presented with the same opportunities, some choose to commit a crime while others do not. This leads to some questions that you may already be thinking. Is crime truly rational? Are criminals really rational actors? Do they really think through all the possible costs and benefits of their actions before choosing to commit a criminal act? After all, it is easy to illustrate that some crimes are products of rational decision-making when they involve ongoing criminal conspiracies for economic gain or property crime where there is an immediate gain and being caught is unlikely. But what about other crimes where rationality is not quite as straightforward? Crimes committed in the spur of the moment are much harder to explain as rational. The obvious example are crimes committed in the heat of anger and passion, including domestic violence, and especially murders committed in the same context. What about crimes driven by alcohol and drug use? Those in an altered state of mind do not appear to be driven by rational decision-making. The same goes for individuals with mental illnesses. Or what about crime that seems entirely senseless, such as mobs and riots, vandalism, and football hooliganism? Or crimes that have tremendously damaging and immediate consequences, such as mass shootings or a bombing as an act of terrorist violence, or violence targeting persons simply due to hatred against a race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or some other general characteristic. This points to another critique of rational choice. It doesn't emphasize the long-term rationality of decisions to commit criminal acts. It focuses on the rationality of the immediate decision to act, not necessarily a full accounting of what could happen to them as a result of that act. So, if decisions to commit crime are not rational, then does that mean they must be irrational? And what are the implications if criminals are irrational? Well, if they are irrational, then predicting when and where crimes might occur becomes much more challenging. If crimes have no rational basis, then the ability to identify and shrink opportunities for crime is called into question. Because if criminals act irrationally, then interventions based on the assumption of rational decision-making, like those of situational crime prevention, may actually be unfounded, not very effective. This, however, assumes that rationality is an all-or-nothing proposition, that crime is either rational or irrational. Perhaps criminal acts are only partially but not fully rational, that the ability to make rational decisions is limited or bounded. This is referred to as bounded rationality. The idea is we can only make choices based on what relevant information we are able to process at the time the decision is made. We limit or bound the amount of information, the sources of information, and potential alternatives considered. The reason we do this is obvious. It's just too overwhelming to consider all of them. We'd never get anything done. There's no possible way to consider everything, so we don't. We use the best of what we have available at that particular moment. Our choices are also limited by the amount of time we have to make the decision and the ability to follow through on a decision even when an opportunity may present itself. This explains why different people make different crime choices. Their decisions are bound by their skills and abilities, by their social and psychological background and experiences. This points to another criticism of opportunity theories, that perhaps too much rationality is assumed in criminal decision-making, that it is a forced assumption, essentially trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. If rationality is limited, and other psychological and social factors come into play as well to explain behavior, what value does rational choice have as an explanation of crime? After all, if other criminological theories, with the exception of biological and some psychological theories, which we'll explore explore over the next 2 weeks, also assumes some level of rationality in decision making. What is the point of using rationality as the basis of its own distinct theory? And if this were true, what is the appeal of explaining crime as a rational choice? Perhaps the underlying appeal is to establish a justification for ourselves in our own reasoning for why criminal acts occur that makes it not so unpredictable, not so unreasonable, not so irrational, not so unknowable, so we can try to find tangible ways to tackle it right where it occurs. But perhaps other theories do a better job explaining why crime occurs. And overemphasizing rational choice takes away the focus from some of these other important explanatory factors. Well, that's all for this week. Next week, we move away from the classical school and turn toward biological theories of crime. Have a good one.